Welcome to All in All.
Great to be here.
We're diving deep today into the materials you've shared about, well, one of the most important and, frankly, most challenging figures in American history, Thomas Jefferson.
Absolutely. Challenging is the word.
We've got articles, essays, research notes, quite a stack, really, covering his life, his ideas, and his incredibly complex legacy.
That's right. And our mission in this deep dive, basically, is to take all this material and really unpack it.
Yeah, try to make sense of it all.
We want to understand, where did his ideas actually come from? Why does he still matter today? What was the real-world impact of his actions?
And how has our view of him shifted? That seems crucial, too.
Exactly. How perceptions have changed over time, and maybe what practical lessons, if any, his story holds for us right now.
It's a big mission because right away, these materials tell us understanding Thomas Jefferson is, well, it's anything but easy.
Not straightforward at all.
He's everywhere. That grand memorial in D.C., he's up on Mount Rushmore, often ranked among the very top presidents.
Right, a towering figure.
But trying to get a clear picture of his inner feelings from this huge volume of writing, the material suggests it's incredibly difficult, almost impossible maybe.
And what's truly fascinating looking through these notes is this idea they present of the protean Jefferson, or sometimes America's everyman.
Protean, meaning like shape-shifting.
Exactly. This figure who's been claimed as a hero or, a guide by wildly different, sometimes even completely opposing political movements throughout history.
That really jumped out at me. I mean, think about it. Southern secessionists quoted him, right?
They did, extensively.
But so did Northern abolitionists.
Yeah, and Gilded Age industrialists saw him as their champion, and then later, the populists did too.
Figures in the Scopes trial, Hoover, FDR, isolationists, interventionists. It seems like everyone finds a piece of Jefferson to latch onto.
It really makes you pause and wonder, as one source puts it, was he a real, consistent historical person, or was he more like a free-floating Rorschach test?
A Rorschach test?
Yeah.
It's a powerful image.
The idea being that our assumptions about him, shaped by our own time and our own needs, can often be, well, more powerful than the actual historical facts.
Which leads to him being called the Great Sphinx of American history.
Precisely. And trying to understand the Sphinx, grappling with the contradictions we see in these sources, it forces us to confront some core American beliefs.
And contested truths, right? Things we still argue about today.
Exactly. It makes us look at our own ideals, our own identity, through the lens of this foundational, yet, let's face it, deeply flawed figure.
It's not just about understanding him, then.
No, it's about what his story, his complexity, reveals about us and the nation he helped shape.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Where did the ideas of this complex sphinx even originate? His early life?
Well, he was born at Shadwell, Virginia, planter family. His father made sure he had private tutors from a young age, like 5 years old, grounded him in Latin and Greek.
Classics were key then.
Very much so. But his father died when Jefferson was only 14. He kept going with his education, though, ending up at the College of William and Mary when he was 16.
And the material notes he pursued, a really strenuous and broad course of studies, not just classics.
No, not at all. He learned multiple languages, French, Italian, Spanish, even Anglo-Saxon. He was clearly brilliant, driven.
But it wasn't just books, was it? Mentors seem important here.
Hugely important. The sources really emphasize this. There is William Small, a Scottish professor who became a close friend. Small apparently opened his eyes to the expansion of science, the system of things.
So science and philosophy were big influences early on, not just law or politics.
Absolutely. Then you have George Wythe, a leading legal scholar, trained him in law, but also government theory, history, ethics.
And Wythe was an abolitionist. That's significant.
Very significant given everything else. And Wythe, interestingly, mentored this incredible group, not just Jefferson, but also John Marshall, Henry Clay, James Monroe. Imagine that circle.
Wow. Quite the lineup.
Incredible, right? And the third key figure mentioned is Francis Fauquier, the lieutenant governor. Jefferson got into his refined circle, enjoyed music, conversation. The sources say Jefferson kind of tried to replicate those stimulating gatherings later in life.
So elite education, wide-ranging studies, and these really influential mentors exposing him to law, science, ethics, high culture.
That's the picture. After William and Mary, he studied law formally with Wythe, got admitted to the bar in 1767, and even did some pro bono work early on.
And there's that striking early legal argument mentioned from 1770.
Oh, yeah, where he argued that everyone comes into the world with a right to his own person. A core idea.
But it got thrown out.
Thrown right out of court. Shows you how radical that was back then, even for a young lawyer in a society built on slavery.
Wow. Articulating that principle so early, the one that ends up in the Declaration, but seeing it just dismissed by the system. What about his personal wealth? Where did he stand?
He inherited a good amount from his father, over 5,000 acres, about 20 enslaved people, books, instruments.
Okay, so already landed gentry.
Yes, but the big inheritance came in 1773 from his father-in-law, John Wales. That brought another 11,000 acres, 135 slaves, and, crucially, 4,000 pounds of debt.
So that really boosted his status, but also brought financial pressure from the start.
Exactly. It made him the second largest slaveholder in Albemarle County. And the sources point out this deeply troubling family connection.
The Hemmings connection.
Yes. John Wales had fathered children with his enslaved concubine, Betty Hemmings, which means Sally Hemings, who becomes so central later, was actually his wife's half-sister.
Good Lord. That's a stark picture of the tangled realities of power, family, and slavery.
It really is. So you have this man, highly educated, well-connected, part of the planter elite, and deeply embedded in the institution of slavery from a young age.
So how did this background, this person, translate into shaping American ideals and the actual government?
Well, his public life really kicks off in the House of Burgesses, representing Albemarle County from 1769 to 76. The sources say he quickly became known as a proficient writer with strong views on colonial rights.
He got involved in the resistance early.
Yes. Signed non-importation agreements, served on committees of correspondence. This led him to write a summary view of the rights of British America in 1774.
Right, that key pre-revolution document.
Key is right. It argued colonists were only subject to the king, not Parliament, and that British taxes and restrictions were basically predatory and invalid, a very bold stance.
Setting the stage for the big one, the Declaration of Independence.
He was a delegate to the Second Continental Congress, and they picked him as the primary author. Approved July 4th, 1776. It's foundational, obviously.
And the sources really stress its significance, don't they?
They do. Establishing fundamental human rights, forging an American identity based on democracy, not monarchy, power from the consent of the governed, and that revolutionary claim. All men are created equal.
Even with all the contradictions we know about, that document positioned him as the key writer of the founding generation, didn't it?
Without a doubt. Now, thinking about the government they were building, his views on the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, are pretty complex.
He wasn't even there for the convention, right? He was in France.
Correct. But he was writing tons of letters back, trying to influence things. The sources highlight his main objections. No Bill of Rights, and no term limits or rotation for the president.
But wasn't he initially a bit hesitant about needing a federal Bill of Rights? The sources mention him saying his opinion was always in favor, but he didn't see the omission as a material defect at first.
That's a really interesting point from the material. He had reasons. Maybe he thought the federal government's powers were limited enough that rights were protected anyway, or he worried listing rights might actually narrow them, especially freedom of conscience.
He'd seen state bills of rights fail too, calling them parchment barriers.
Exactly. He had practical doubts based on what he'd seen. Parchment barriers, easily violated by majorities.
But he definitely came around, became a strong advocate.
Oh, absolutely. He became quite adamant about the need for a Bill of Rights against every government on Earth. The thinking seems to have shifted. He saw its potential use, even if it wasn't perfect.
What use did he see in it then?
The sources suggest he saw its power in shaping public opinion, national sentiment. Declaring truths makes them fundamental maxims ingrained in the culture. Crucially, he saw it as good ground for an appeal against government overreach, a check on artful and ambitious rulers.
He was particularly worried about the presidency becoming too powerful, like a monarchy.
Very much so. That evolution in his thinking is fascinating, and this passion for liberty extended strongly to religious freedom.
A huge part of his legacy.
Definitely. He called the fight to disestablish the Anglican Church in Virginia one of his severest contests, and that famous line in Notes on the State of Virginia.
It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God.
It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. A really stark statement that belief is private, outside government control.
Which understandably got him into trouble politically.
Oh, yeah. He drafted the Virginia Statute for establishing religious freedom, enacted in 1786. He was so proud of it, he wanted it on his tombstone, along with the Declaration and founding UVA.
And then there's the Wall of Separation letter.
Right, to the Danbury Baptists, talking about A wall of separation between church and state, a phrase that's echoed ever since.
His own beliefs were unconventional.
Deeply religious, the sources say, but unconventionally so. Believed in a rational God seen in nature. He admired Jesus' morals, called it Christianism, but rejected the divinity, resurrection, miracles.
Hence the Jefferson Bible, cutting out the miracle.
Exactly, just keeping the moral philosophy, which, of course, led opponents in the 1800 election to call him an arch-infidel.
He was also a big defender of press freedom.
Staunch defender. Wrote in 1786, "Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost." Pretty clear stance.
So these strong ideals about liberty, equality, freedom of conscience, freedom of the press, they bring us right back to that massive contradiction.
The central, unavoidable issue. The material is clear. He inherited enslaved people, owned maybe 600 over his lifetime, benefited directly. Slavery propped up the whole Southern economy, his entire way of life.
The man who wrote, "All men are created equal."
Also wrote in notes on the state of Virginia that black people seemed inferior to the whites in the endowments both of body and mind. The sources note he called it a hypothesis based on observation, but acknowledged he couldn't escape his own cultural baggage.
So not just benefiting, but actually writing racist theories. Yet the sources also mention attempts against slavery.
They do. Early on, with George Wythe, he drafted a plan in 1777 for gradual emancipation in Virginia. Included education, colonization, but it never even got presented. The public mind would not yet bear the proposition, apparently.
Same with a later plan in a draft constitution.
Right. A 1784 draft tried to abolish slavery after 1800. Didn't happen. Madison noted emancipation petitions back then were just rejected without dissent.
He did use notes on the state of Virginia to try and sway younger generations, though. That line, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just."
Yes, referencing divine judgment for slavery. And it did influence some, like Winfield Scott. There was even a sort of obscure plan to import German workers, transition enslaved people to free farmers, maybe imagining a multiracial future. But that idea seemed to fade.
But later, his public stance mostly became slavery as a necessary evil.
Seems that way. He started pushing colonization schemes, deporting black Americans. Partly fear of race war if they were freed and stayed, partly fear of economic ruin for himself in the South.
Which brings us to Sally Hemings.
The sources tackle this directly. James Callender's public accusation in 1802. Jefferson keeps as his concubine one of his slaves. Her name is Sally. And they confirm she was his wife's enslaved half-sister and that Jefferson fathered children with her. At least 6, 4 survived.
The sources use terms like intimate relationship, liaison, sexual relationship, always within that context of profound power imbalance.
It's a stark example of how the system he lived in, benefited from, deeply contradicted his own stated ideals. And despite earlier efforts or private worries, he didn't free most people he enslaved during his life.
He did free some Hemings family members in his will, though.
Yes, 5 males. His 2 natural sons, Sally's younger half-brother, 2 nephews, gave them resources, petitioned for them to stay in Virginia, which was unusual.
But for the hundreds of others.
That's a tragedy. He died deeply in debt, lifestyle, Monticello, helping others. It all added up. His estate was swamped. So after his death, about 130 enslaved people, nearly everyone at Monticello besides those few freed, were sold at auction. Families broken up.
It's just incredibly hard to reconcile the philosopher of liberty with the man who owned, theorized about, and ultimately saw people sold, including potentially his own kin.
And that's the core of the historical debate. Hypocrite. Victim of his time. Could he have done more? The sources show contemporaries did speak out more strongly. They also raise the context, the dangers, the societal pressure, the lack of options for freed people then.
It really highlights the gap between ideals and navigating a brutal reality. Now, beyond slavery, his presidency also showed actions clashing with his philosophy, right?
Yes. As president, the material says he sometimes pushed the limits of his executive authority. Kind of ironic for an advocate of states' rights and small government.
The Louisiana Purchase being the big one.
Absolutely. Doubled the U.S. size buying it from France in 1803. Sources call it an extreme abuse of federal power by his own standards because the Constitution didn't explicitly allow it. He wrestled with it, but strategic concerns won out over his strict constructionism, didn't even pursue an amendment.
And then the Embargo Act of 1807. Not exactly small government intervention.
Definitely not. Complete ban on external trade to pressure Britain and France. Total failure. Crippled the U.S. economy, especially New England. Caused a deep recession. Congress ditched it right after he left office.
We also can't forget the rivalry with Hamilton. that defines so much.
Oh, absolutely. Their clashes were like a microcosm of the political history of the United States, as one source puts it. Jefferson, rural, agrarian, pro-France, weaker central government. Hamilton, urban, pro-Britain, strong banking, strong central government.
Jefferson hated the federal bank idea.
Vocally opposed it. Even the capital ending up in D.C. was part of a compromise over Hamilton's plan for the federal government to assume state debts. Their conflict shaped the early republic fundamentally.
So this figure of immense ideals and profound contradictions, how has his image, this great sphinx, changed over the years?
That Protean Jefferson idea really comes into play. Interpretations shifted constantly based on the needs of the time. Abolitionists used him, secessionists used him, progressives, conservatives. Everyone found their Jefferson.
There's been a big academic reassessment too, right? Like that 1992 conference at UVA.
Yeah, the Jeffersonian Legacies Conference. Sources describe it almost like a public trial for Jefferson. Sharp critiques emerged. Paul Finkelman, for example, basically said historians were mesmerized and suggested words like dissimulation, duplicity, and denial were more apt.
A move away from just hero worship.
Definitely. Gordon Wood's perspective, mentioned in the materials, is useful here. He argues against both idolizing figures and ripping them out of context. Idolizing Jefferson as some perfect moral hero just leads to disillusionment when you hit his time-bound weaknesses. Wood says the problem isn't Jefferson's flaws, it's our unrealistic expectations of historical figures.
That makes sense. We expect them to be like us, or better than us, maybe.
Right. And as we learn more, our understanding has to evolve. The public fascination hasn't faded, though.
Not at all. His 250th anniversary in 1993 saw tons of books, novels, poetry, big exhibits. Monticello's attendance apparently rivaled Graceland. Films, too.
And what's interesting is how the focus shifted. The Sally Hemings story, for example, became much more central in the public discussion around that time.
Shows our ongoing interest, but also our changing priorities and what we want to understand about these figures. How did Jefferson himself see his legacy? What did he want to be remembered for?
The sources suggest he didn't see it as a fixed inheritance, but more like a living faith in the future. The spirit of 1776, the sacred fire of liberty. He explicitly wanted his memorial to list the Declaration, the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and being father of the University of Virginia.
Not being president.
No. Those three things. Achievements that looked to the future. He believed they'd only be worth remembering if future generations redeemed their promise.
Wow. That's quite a challenge he left. His legacy wasn't finished. It was up to others to fulfill it. Okay, let's talk practical relevance. What can we actually learn today from this deep dive?
Well, Monticello itself is instructive. It wasn't just a pretty house. It was his intellectual lab, agriculture, science, diplomacy, and reflected his architectural ideas. The layout itself tells a story.
Like the hidden passages for enslaved workers.
Exactly. Those concealed corridors, the underground routes. They weren't just clever design. They were about managing the enslaved labor system discreetly, keeping the human machinery that ran the place out of sight. The building itself shows this blend of high ideals, aesthetic beauty, and the harsh reality underpinning it.
A physical reminder of the contradictions. That's powerful. What else? Education seems huge for him.
Absolutely central. His belief, as the sources put it, was only educated citizens could make the American experiment in self-government succeed. He proposed this radical, for his time, system of free public education in Virginia primary, intermediate, university levels.
With UVA as the crown jewel.
Precisely. Founded it, designed the academical village to embody his vision of education supporting democracy. He even saw his writings, like notes, as educational tools to shape future thinking on big issues like slavery.
Though, crucially, the sources note, Black people and women were excluded from this vision of educated citizenship.
A critical point. Their fight for access to education has been central to their fight for rights ever since. His vision was limited by his time, even as he pushed boundaries elsewhere.
His personal finances are also kind of relevant, strangely.
They really are. Inherited huge wealth, land, people, yet struggled with debt his whole life. Lavish spending, building Monticello, imports, helping friends. It ate up money.
Contrasting sharply with his praise for the simple yeoman farmer.
Right. It's a reminder that personal practice doesn't always match philosophical ideals, even for the icons.
And just the fact that we're still debating him so intensely, like in the online discussions mentioned in the sources,
yeah,
that's relevant too, isn't it?
That ongoing reevaluation is the practical lesson, in a way. It shows history isn't static. We keep wrestling with these figures, viewing them through new lenses. His story forces us to confront how brilliant ideals can coexist with deep personal flaws and societal constraints.
This deep dive certainly makes it clear. Jefferson isn't someone you can easily categorize or summarize.
Not even close. He embodies contradictions that are, still arguably part of the American fabric.
So, thinking about that Protean Jefferson idea, again, that the figure who changes depending on who's looking, and Gordon Wood's point about how our interpretations often say more about us.
Yeah.
Well, what is our current intense fascination and often really heated conflict over Jefferson's legacy tell us about the state of American ideals and identity right now? That's the question that kind of sticks with you, doesn't it?
It really does. A profound question to ponder.
Thanks for listening to All in All.